YouTube catch up. Do you work in YouTube? Sometimes I wonder, man. Sometimes I wonder if YouTube knows what it's doing. Happy Tuesday, folks. It's the end of November, man. It's weird. It feels like this year has just flown by. Like, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago that I was at Fishtoberfest, and really doesn't feel like it was all that long ago that I was in Kentucky for Triple Crown, and yet here we are. Like, months removed from all those things. It's just like, time be flying like crazy. Let's see. Let's talk about a couple things before we get on topic. Just let folks get in here, all those kind of usual things, right? Let's see here. What can we talk about? Oh, there was the auction for the Amazon Research Center of Ornamental Fishes over the weekend. Jeez, chat, you're killing me. Chat, you're killing me. I made a purchase during that auction of some sweet little plecos, and you want to hear the funny part? They're not even coming to my house. I bought plecos to send to someone else, but they are my fish. So I bought the Aikidos Tiger Pleco, which is a Hypancistris series. Or no, not Hypancistris, I'm sorry. They're a Pedonculus series. That's the L226 Pleco. They're really cool looking, honestly. They're a wood eater. Think like the L397, and they're kind of similar to the L397 in some ways, as far as their appearance is concerned. But there's a lot of variation in their color from what I've seen in pictures. I've basically never seen this pleco available in a store, and they're coming direct from Dr. Mazerall, so yeah. But I'm sending them to my friend, who's kind of a pleco enthusiast, might be the right word, but so for those who've seen Alyssa Bentley in chat, like, we're not related at all, but we do go to the same fish club, and we live kind of close to each other in the grand scheme of things. She's like 15 minutes from my house, but she's my pleco source. She knows way more about plecos than I do. She's way better at breeding plecos than I am. So I contacted her. I was like, "Hey, you got spare room in a tank?" And she was like, "For what?" I'm like, "These." She's like, "I could make room." So next week I'm next day airing them to her place. That I think it's silly, but at the same time, it's great when you have friends that know stuff really well, and I think that's why I like ideas like digital fish clubs and things like that, where people can get to know each other better. Just like the fish fan community in general is so awesome. It's nice. Leo 209. Oh, we can get into that argument later, maybe. I'll change your mind. I don't know how you Nabokov fans. I don't know how you didn't get the chameleons. Part of it came down to the other thing that I was most interested in went for a pretty good amount of money to somebody who I trust will be able to breed them well, and that was the all red pencilfish. And funny story, if I would have not seen who they were going to, and or just not known the person, I would have fought for those pretty hard, and I would have immediately gave them to Dean. So all the fish that I was most interested in, I would have sent to other people because I want them to get bred and be more common up here in the Northwest. It's like a blatant admission that I'm a terrible fish breeder, and I know that I'm not good at breeding fish, so I send them to other people to do it instead. Oh man. You have to find humor in that, right? Or at least like know what you're good at. Plants, I got those covered. Fish, But really what it'll come down to is I'm setting up some 40 breeders, and I only have, they need to come in a certain time faster than what I'm going to have a tank really established and ready. So hopefully we can see some breeding out of them, or just get a feel for what they need and what they want outside of being like a wood-eating pleco. And what most wood eat, like we know a lot of the kind of information, right? But it's one of those things where you just like you kind of have to observe and see what makes them happiest. Like what kind of wood do they like the most? What kind of caves do they like? Because anybody who's kept plecos for a while, especially if you try to breed them, some plecos will breed in like any cave known to man. You just put in like those cheapo gardening water stakes, and they work perfectly. Most ancistrous. But then there are other plecos that are way more picky, and literally like you can go to the nicest types of ceramic caves, and it comes down to sometimes it's color, sometimes it's texture. You just like you never know with some of these fish like what just like makes them go like, yes, this is the thing. And sometimes it's like us just guessing randomly, and it's all about something completely unrelated. But going to someone who's far far better with plecos than me, and has ins with lots of people who are way more knowledgeable than my circle, if you will, my closest circle when it comes to like depth of pleco understanding. I feel like it's the right call, right? But over time, I'll get them back eventually, or I'll get babies, and I'll be very happy about that because they're a really cool looking fish. Okay, let's talk topic for a second. So this actually is like spawned on by my club. We have a holiday party every year, uh, in December, of course, and we have this game that we call Fisho, which is basically bingo, but instead of like numbers, the categories are all fish related. And the O category every year is usually something kind of random. We'll have different themes. And this year's theme is the most important invention to further the fish keeping hobby. And so a lot of times if it's something new or we're trying something different, we let club members submit ideas. And I wanted to take this, like I just wanted to take the concepts because the history of fish keeping, there's like this channel that's all about it. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's called The Secret History Living in Your Aquarium. This guy, some random dude up in Seattle. But if we look at like fish keeping, right? Fish have been kept for hundreds of years, but realistically, the way that most of us keep fish and how we think of fish keeping in a more modern sense really doesn't spawn until the 1920s. There's a few things like just before that, but realistically, almost all of modern fish keeping is within the last 100 years. Okay, so an example, one of the major innovations in fish keeping starts in 1908, which is the first air pump designed specifically for aquariums. Now the problem is the first one that was built had a lot of issues and wasn't very reliable, which led us to like and some of you've probably seen pictures of this. They're like a big flywheel style where it's a wheel with this outside air, like air tube has to go in. These big wheels that are sitting there spinning and moving a tube to crank a shaft to push air around. And those particular pumps were loud. They required like regular oiling and maintenance, and that could be messy. So we don't get until what we look at as like the modern style air pump until basically the 60s. There's some diaphragm pumps before then, but realistically, we don't see those kind of air pumps exist until the 60s. But the air pump, realistically, for aquariums, specifically for aquariums, starts in 1908. But really, like the biggest change, innovation, invention, if you will, in modern fish keeping comes down to something that I think is super interesting. The Metaframe tank. Now, this might blow your mind because it kind of blew mine. The way that we think of a standard like glass box and the old Metaframes are a matter of a development in not the pet industry, but the toy industry. Fish keeping in the 20s and what we consider modern frame with the brand of Metaframe was owned by Mattel of all companies. Metaframe was owned by Mattel, the toy maker. And the aquariums that basically are the founding fathers of our modern day glass and silicone tanks are made by Mattel with Metaframe. And we call them Metaframes now, and I think a lot of people don't understand it. Metaframe is because that was the name of the brand that made those metal outside tanks. Pretty interesting, right? We're talking about a toy company. And originally, a lot of this came from in Germany. A lot of the big things that matter early on come in Germany. Now, the next kind of like major leap that I would say, or invention, discovery, this is kind of not necessarily an invention, right? But in 1928 is when one of the most well celebrated staple fish foods in our hobby was effectively realized to be a fish food. And that's brine shrimp. Baby brine shrimp and hatching brine shrimp started becoming a thing in 1928 at the Steinhardt Aquarium in Golden Gate Park, so San Francisco. The curator, Dr. Alvin Seal, who's an ichthyologist, right? So scientist, discovered that by using these things, fish went bat-ass crazy for them, and noted remarkable increases in their health when they started eating that kind of food. So you can think about we haven't even been using brine shrimp for 100 years. The best food for almost all of our fish, whether you're salt or freshwater. Chat, you're killing me. So we go from in the 20s, we have two big changes, right? The Metaframe tank, and as Paul Saltero is explaining, like the original Metaframe tanks had a slate bottom; they weren't glass. And then the adhesive used changed over time, but it was this thick black stuff. And I think some were even like lead lined, like windows were at one point, but they realized then lead is a bad thing in water. But there's this like, I can't remember what the actual chemical compound they use. I don't think it's silicone, but it's this thick black stuff. You look at really truly old Metaframe tanks, and then they have that chrome plated metal that holds the edges. Right? This is how they created their seals. Is those edges, the glass plates, and then that thick, and I mean, it was thick stuff. And then slowly over time, we went to regular silicone. And like Dennis Engel and Chad is mentioning, originally how you would try to heat those tanks is you could literally put a candle under the slate and warm the slate bottom. Because aquariums back then, for the most part, were unheated. We only had air to move the water. There were plants were actually used, but you would have to have them by a window to get sunlight. Or you would have to keep things that could naturally handle the outdoor temperatures of water. This is what fish keeping was in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and even up until basically the 50s. We do get heaters at some point. I struggled to find a really good date on when heaters started hitting aquariums. However, the 60s is where like innovation goes hog wild in aquariums and they become more popular. Okay? So, two of the big ones. These are things that I think you guys are going to really like. To make sure I get my dates correct. All right. So, this one I think you're going to find funny. The Powerhead. So, a way other than using air in order to move water initially is invented in 1960. There's a gentleman named Norbert Tuns. Maybe it's Tunes? Not sure on the exact pronunciation of the last name. Self-employed guy, an electronics repairman. He was repairing this pump for model railroads made by Eheim, a toy maker at the time. Back in the 60s, Eheim was not in aquatics at all. And after he did some work on this and tried it on his own aquarium, he went to Eheim and suggested that they look into making these pumps for aquariums. And the folks that ran Eheim at the time had no interest. They didn't feel it was a viable product and could make money. Do you associate with Eheim anything other than aquatics nowadays? It's interesting how some of these companies kind of come back, right? Because early on Eheim, they were making toys and things for model trains, and eventually, despite saying, "Oh, I don't think that's viable," ended up as one of the premier makers of products in the aquarium industry. Now, staying in the 60s, let's stick with pumps for a second because I think this is important. The magnetic impeller driven aquarium pump. So the same thing that runs lots of almost every style of aquarium pump we use nowadays, whether it's in a hang-on-back, a canister, etc. 1967. So we go from the Powerhead to the impeller pump that we all know, and you can literally look up the patent. It's US 348158-6A. Is the original patent under just magnetic aquarium pump is how it's designed. But that's the standard magnetic impeller pump that's submersible that we see in nearly every design of power filter outside of a Powerhead today. Diving back all the way to 67. And no, I don't have all this stuff memorized. I totally have notes over here on this other screen. So don't think I've got all this like lodged in my brain. Some of it I do, but not this depth. The 60s is like it is the time because there's one other critical invention that furthered our hobby in the 60s. I'll be very curious if you guys know what it is. It's most predominant in salt water. So after the Powerhead is in 1960, in 1963, also by another German guy. All these German guys are just inventing everything that we know in our hobby. Apparently, Germany is the place to go in the 60s with aquariums. 1963, a gentleman noticed the uplift tubes around his undergravel filter, which undergravel filters were the way to go. Air-driven filtration under gravel is how it's been done since the 20s. Notice this like brown color around those things. He started doing some work, used a tube and a cup, and created the first protein skimmer. So one of the most critical things for a majority of us hobbyists to be able to keep saltwater fish, the protein skimmer. 1963, Germany. All because of observations around his undergravel filter. And it's effectively the same design. It's just airlift tubes and a collection cup to this day with our modern protein skimmers. The base technology hasn't really changed. We've just found ways to make them more efficient, more powerful, etc. First class fish. I'm guessing Aquarius started a lot of house fires back in the day. Maybe. Maybe. But let's think about how wild that is. Some of the most important things basically happen in two spots, the 20s and the 60s. And they all influence everything we do today. And the technology hasn't changed all that much from the 60s. If you look at the technical schematic of the magnetic aquarium pump, and then you look at basically every other impeller designed pump to this day, they're basically the same. Isn't that crazy? Now, modern times, we get all sorts of interesting stuff that happened in the 70s too. The 60s and 70s were one of like the golden ages of fish keeping. This is where fish keeping became far more popular. In the 20s, it was spawned by like this what is called the naturalist movement, where trying to include nature, and that's where a lot of like gardening got more like popular mass appeal. There's some bigger stuff there too, but man, it's wild to me. We look at these things. Like you can dig into the 80s and start finding things like Venturi skimmers and more motorized skimmers and some of these differences, but realistically, the biggest development since the 60s, other than it's been hard to find out when like the modern style heater was designed, and I did a short search. Let's keep this in mind, right? I only had so much time after work, but the next massive increase that I would say is getting to LED lighting. Because LED lighting and controlled lighting in some way, shape, or form outside of like compact fluorescence are what allow us to keep modern planted plants or coral, right? You can still do coral without LEDs, and some people will still say that tube lighting is the best way for coral. But some of the most complicated corals often require a mixture of light because they're so demanding, and it is significantly easier for most of us in the hobby to do things with modern LED lighting than it is to try and figure out the nonsense that would be compact fluorescent or any other similar like T5, T8 lighting, right? Now, what's the most important invention to further the fish keeping hobby now? We have all this backbone that brings us to where we are today. Glass boxes made by a toy company. Another toy company saying no to the first Powerhead. The evolution of air pumps, eventually figuring out heaters, the magnet pump, the protein skimmer. All these things are critical in a lot of the ways that we fix and get our normal aquariums going. Kingfisher's Catch says international shipping and freight. I would argue that's a great one, right? The innovations in the shipping industry are part of what make us capable of keeping live fish. However, I want to propose one other thing. The internet. In the past, and this is applicable to me because I can remember as a child when I was getting into fish and I wanted to learn more about certain fish, I was fascinated with discus and African cichlids for a while in my like between about 8 and 13. You had to find books all over the place, right? And you had to hope that you would find somebody. And it used to be like if people knew how to successfully breed certain fish, very rarely would they share unless they knew that you were going to give them some other secret with something else, right? Unless you were kind of in this inner circle of people, it was hard to get information outside of published literature. And not every library carried a reasonable number of books about aquarium fishes and how to keep them in captivity. But now you have idiots like me, right, on the internet who are happy to share our screw ups, our successes, what we understand, what we don't know. And this massive network of information is more than just the fish keeping hobby, right? The digital age has been huge for people's access to information. But as far as our hobby is concerned, there are a lot of people I've seen in recent years who learn what would take you 30 years to understand in a matter of a few months because so much information is available. And when we do find out things, the scientists and things like that who are willing to share that information have an easy way to distribute their information. Kind of fantastic, right? The pond is older than the aquarium. Who invented that? That's, I mean, technically, like the mother of fish keeping, right? You can go back on that. The Japanese have been keeping carp as a cultivated food source and eventually as a decorative fish since like it's like the 1300s. I mean, it's a while, but think about it, like Nabokov fan just mentioned like Planet Catfish, you know, Live Aquaria, PlanetTank.net. Think of all the massive resources, not just YouTube, but like the wealth of articles that have been written by whether it's companies that sell aquarium products, like Aquarium Co-op has their newsletters and their articles that they put up, whether it's just random engineers that go and look at things and break them apart and like tell you all sorts of stuff. You have folks like Father Fish, right, who are now internet, but ran a fish store for years, learned lessons about something that's not as common in the hobby, running a fish store for years, and then used the internet to help spread his own learnings and his own observations. And you could say the same about Kevin Novak, or basically any one of us dum-dums here on YouTube, right? It applies to all of us. But it doesn't have to be purely YouTube. You can find all sorts of articles, sometimes not great ones, or you can find all sorts of drama too. Facebook. Uh, Monster Fish Keepers, back in the day, their forums kind of had a notoriety to them, but there's tons of these places that have been out there. And I think as we push forward, unless there is some massive quantum leap in some of the tech that's out there, the internet will be the most defining invention that helps keep the fish keeping hobby going. If it weren't for the internet, most of you probably would never know who keepfishkeeping.com is, who Aquarium Co-op is, who Dustin's Fish Tanks are, any of these. And chat, you can say no, not expert person. They're still putting out things based on their observations, right? Whether you agree with them or not, whether you like the person or not, that's not what I'm talking about. But more the fact that you can get information, observations, experience from a wealth of other people who share a hobby. with you. And in that regard, pretty tough to fight that bad boy, right? I've been kicked out of several Facebook groups. I get invited to, I swear, like 10 Facebook groups a week. And I don't really use Facebook all that often. So I'll check in like once a month and I'll have like just a wealth of invitations that I have to go through and just like decline. Because I already get so much like stuff that drogs through some of my places that it's hard to keep up as is, when basically I only want to use that platform for like my family. Yeah, there's an example in Angkor Wat, which is in Cambodia. It's a Hindu temple originally. They had ponds in like the 12th century. Now I don't know how well they were cultivating species of fish in there, right? But you know, the Japanese have been doing it forever. Forever. Excuse me for a moment. My nose has been bothered. But yeah, we're gonna have a little fun with this one. And just because it's a fun topic, if you think about, there's some fun observations, like the fact that Mattel is the reason why our modern glass fish tanks exist, or the fact that Eheim started as a toy company with model railroad stuff mostly, and the first thing that they looked at, they turned down to become an aquarium company, and eventually they ended up there anyway. Right? Some of these silly things like that. Or basically how Germany invented almost everything that we use in modern day aquarium keeping. Except for the magnetic impeller pump. That was here in the States. That's where the patent's from. All right. So with that being said, you know, chat, thanks for joining in on these things, enjoying them. It's just a little crazy, right? It's kind of fun to learn some of those things. Delving into the history of our hobby is oddly fascinating. There's tons of like crazy little things you learn, and it can change your appreciation of the hobby. It can change how you look at certain things, and that's what I love the most about it. Right? It's fun to look at those things. Now, that being said, we're gonna go into the normal question and answer session. At Bentley Pascal makes it super easy for me to see what you have to say. So bring it on. Bring it on. All right. Leo had a super chat earlier. Plecos are the best fish. Changing my mind. Sure. I'll change your mind. Rainbow fish. Let me explain why. Rainbow fish, visible all the time, brightly colored, all of them, social, peaceful, big but not too big, go well with plants, go well without plants. Plecos hide. Most plecos are only limited in certain colors. Very rarely do you see a pleco that is outside of yellow, brown, black. Some semblances of white. Yes, you have things like the blue phantom pleco, but they lose that over time as they get older. They don't have that lovely blue color. You have the green phantom pleco and the green dragon pleco, but if you look at a longfin green dragon, it's got a lot of brown in it. It's not very green. It's kind of got a little olive drab in it, but it's a lot of brown. We get a little reachy with our plecos. Now, plecos are interesting because they're kind of a chase fish, right? And it's one of those things where I think as a pleco keeper, when you can get your plecos comfortable enough to not have them be that fish that you see once a month, and that's the exciting part about them, that's when it's fun. Yeah, rainbow fish are dumb. Dumb. But man, are they pretty. Man, are they pretty. I should maybe start arguing that, like, you know, the danger noodles are the best, because they are hilarious. Greg, good to see you, buddy. Has a great point. Like silicone is probably something I should have looked into. Is like when silicone was first used in aquariums, because that made the manufacturing of glass aquariums significantly cheaper, which makes it more accessible. And I think that's one of the things that happened in like the 50s. I remember. I mean, I don't know the exact date, but I'd have to go look it up because there's a wealth of more inexpensive tanks that start hitting in the 50s and 60s. So it's probably right around there, or it's very early 60s. Realistically, what is it out? Whatever fish you love the most is the best fish. Because whether I like rainbow fish, or maybe I am a tetra fanatic, or I am a live bearer nerd, doesn't matter. All that really matters in the end is that we all like fish. And as long as we can all respect each other for liking fish, even those people who like Oscars, that's what matters. Colorado Aquarium has an article, Aquariums Now and Then. That sounds fun. I would read that. I'm into that stuff, dude. I that's why like I'll drop in on my buddy Alex's channel every once in a while, 'cause when he's digging into the history, there's some really fun stuff. You know, it's enjoyable. No, Dennis. So let me explain why I love like giving some S to Oscars. When I did keep larger cichlids, I kept Jack Dempsey's. This is back when I was in college when my cousin used to live with me, cousin Henry, who some of you, if you've watched like the Pecco horror stories, that's the cousin that lived with me for a while. Um, I have no beef with Oscars, but when John from KG Tropicals put out his whole like, if you don't like Oscars, F you, I immediately said Oscars suck, just because I occasionally have a desire to be a line stepper. Or to just kind of like, it's that part of me that like spent so many years in like gamer culture, where it's like the second you're like, if you don't like X, then Y, then I'm immediately going to go like, X sucks. It's part of how I show appreciation, is by sarcastic shit talking. Let's be real about it. gotta feed the inner trolls, then it chills out for the most part. Also, I do it out of love. Like Oscars are so fun because they're like giant puppy dogs at times, right? My former roommate who used to live with me, he had an Oscar for a while named Scooby, and he could tell me all these things about how like you could tell when Scooby was depressed because he wasn't getting the right attention, and he would like just lay down in his tank, and you reach your hand in and he'd immediately kind of like get up, like how you see blood parrots do all the time, and parrot cichlids, where they'll like literally cuddle your hands and stuff. Oscars have personality. Just for me, I when I did keep cichlids of that size, I was into Jack Dempsey's. And that's because I love the blue colors. That's not obvious, but the fact that I wear blue all the dang time. Um, so naturally, I went more toward those kind of fish as opposed to Oscars. Plus, besides, have you ever seen a baby Jack Dempsey versus an adult Jack Dempsey? Then look at the Oscars in the same vein. Jack Dempsey's are way better. Way better. Dr. Maz, good to see you, buddy. Gotta send me all the details so I can send you some money. I owe you a few American dollar dues. Lee, God meant for me to push a button. Oh. Or in this case, to push a Bentley, right? But yeah, every once in a while, like when I come from, especially in like I did a lot of sports when I was young, right? And one of the best ways that you kind of like showed whether it was respect, friendship, that kind of like brotherly feeling was you kind of naturally like push the buttons of those who you care the most about, because it's in that those moments of when you can look at each other and laugh at like everything when you give each other a little bit. You know, you give somebody a rough time, make them tougher, thicken that skin up a little bit, right? It's just part of a weird way of like friend culture that I grew off on. I don't know. It's how I grew up. We're weird people. Mike Stanbaugh, Bentley, do you know anyone selling Anubias gigantea? That's a good question, actually. I I know that at one point Boost Plant had some in stock. Um, I don't think they do now, though. That's the problem. Like, it's been hard to find. There's a couple of Nubia species outside of like all the whites that people are gone for that you don't really tissue culture very well, and it's a lot harder to find those. TJ the Fish Dad, hey Bentley, is there such a thing as too much flow with rainbow fish? Not really. Most rainbows, I mean, you want to have some space for them to have a rest area, but a lot of rainbows naturally come from stream systems. Now, there are lake rainbow fish too, so basically, melanotanias don't handle high levels of flow as well as chalatherinas. And in the end, the glossolepis, they almost exclusively come from lakes. I can't actually think of any of them that come from a stream system off the top of my head. So they're the ones that handle the higher flow the worst, and this is in big quotation marks because most of them can handle flow pretty well. And apparently, Geek Boy is saying that Dustin's Fish Tanks has some Anubias gigantea. So there's an option for you. If it is indeed Anubias gigantea. We could hope it is, but I don't know. I haven't seen it in a while, man. Jack Dempsey's can be found in a small stream in South Dakota. How the heck do they handle the winter? I mean, they're not notorious for handling cold water all that well. I'm surprised. I mean, fish will find a way, don't get me wrong, but that's kind of impressive. But yeah, Dempsey's can be big jerks. That's the biggest problem with him. Obviously, named for a boxer who is notorious for just like beating the heck out of people, but whew. Whew. All right, let me see. I know there's like a question that I missed here while I was babbling about random stuff. Or maybe it was a comment. We did talk about Greg's comment about silicone. Okay, there was this comment, sorry. From Elaine. It was like Walmart killed the aquarium hobby by selling beginner cichlids. You know what I actually think is worse for the aquarium hobby than that? I mean, not to say that Walmart is ever good for the aquarium hobby, but the prolific sale of the common plecos, right? It's tough. Aha! There we go. Dr. Maz called it, but the stream is fed by a hot spring. Amazonas has an article on it. That's but I mean, that's fantastic and terrifying at the same time. Terrifying in the sense of what it will do naturally to the natural environment, but fantastic in the sense of like the crazy things nature will show you, where you're like, South Dakota, that seems like a state that's pretty cold. Ah, a hot spring, right? Nature does crazy geothermal things. Never said I was a scientist, man. I'm just some dummy. I'm just some dummy on the internet. Oh, man. But to get back on the flow thing, so TJ, what I would say is I wouldn't go... If you're getting some of the really big, or the guys that have the potential to get fairly big, so like Goldie-eyed Takai, Van Heereni, some of the really big Melanotanias, turquoise and stuff like that, I wouldn't go above like 6 or 10 at most times turnover in your tanks. I wouldn't build like a river system tank for them, but if you're looking at like the running river rainbow or a bunch of the chalatherinas, they can handle some pretty good flow. You just need to make sure that you have an area that they can go and rest in that protects them from that flow if necessary. So, rock work and stuff like that, it's very easy to do. Build areas that are offshoots that have less flow running through them. But that's really it. So just basically when they want to rest, they have a spot they can go to that's a little less intense. But most of those fish live in stream water systems anyway. The Australians especially are the Australian rainbows are better at handling flow. Legion Aquatics. Bentley, how do I get rid of hair algae in my tank? Oh, I don't know if we have enough time. So the biggest thing is when you're getting any kind of hair algae, it is some kind of imbalance in the amount of light, the amount of nutrients, and it can only be a singular nutrient that's way out of whack versus the amount of carbon that's available. Okay? So if you're not injecting CO2, but you're using a really powerful light, that's going to cause, that almost always causes some form of algae issue. Now, if you're not using a very powerful light and you're not using CO2, but then you're dumping lots of fertilizer or also lots of fish food in, you cause some kind of imbalance because they're only able to uptake so much, right? They don't have enough carbon to like really go crazy because you're not injecting CO2. And you're not super high light, so it's not like the light should be the issue that can cause algae. There's some excess happening. It depends kind of on what kind of hair algae you have. Do you have like really long string algae? Do you have the shorter, fuzzier hair algae? Is it blackbeard algae? Is it green algae? Is it a light green color versus a dark green color? Is it that like super wavy, very soft, almost slimy green hair algae where it just like it really flows, like it like locks in the wind, like very Hollywood-esque in your water flow? Or is it more static? Because each of these algae is a little different and the way that they occur is different. And that's what like solving the hair algae problem is so complex, because hair algae is inherently more complex than most of the other algae, right? Dust algae on a surface, this kind of stuff that I have in here, right? Way different. Much more simplistic in how it grows, how you treat it, how you get rid of it, etc. Now, the easiest way is this. Is your light on for more than 8 hours a day? Reduce it down to 8 hours a day. Is your light on very powerful for a shorter tank? Dim your light down if you can. If you're injecting fertilizers, make sure you're not using too much. And when you're feeding, cut your feeding back. If you feed one heavy feeding once a day, go to feeding every other day. Or cut the amount of food you feed your fish naturally in half and still feed every day. If you're feeding a tablespoon of food, feed half of that. If you're doing like a generous pinch, do a small pinch. Fish surprisingly need very little food if they're eating every single day. Right? Fish are very, very efficient creatures. This is going to reduce a couple of things. Namely, we're trying to reduce some phosphates. But as we start bringing some of these things back and reducing them, then what we want to do is manually remove as much of the hair algae as we possibly can. Aha! So this is interesting. Let's talk about this. When you removed your CO2, because I've seen this before, and I know this problem. When you removed your CO2, did you continue dosing the same amount of fertilizer and keep the light at the same amount? Because it might have been fine with CO2 because it's able to process significantly more because there's excess carbon available to those plants. Carbon is the most important building block for growth. But if you kept everything else the same, Now it can only grow at a rate significantly lower because it doesn't have all that extra carbon. But if everything else stayed high, now there's excesses, and the algae can capitalize on it. So what we need to do is adjust the rest of those things down to account for the fact that we're no longer using CO2, remove as much of the algae as we can, and that should stymie the algae's growth and help the plants get everything back into balance. And yes, if you're seeing any kind of plant die-off, like Nabokov fan is saying, you could then be creating excess phosphates beyond just your food, and now you're dealing with that issue too. Lots of stuff. Yeah, you could also try and run CO2 to both, but if they're in different rooms, it becomes a little harder. There's lots of stuff like that. So hopefully that gets you in the right direction. Yeah, that's the biggest problem. Like, hair algae is so complex, and there's like a million questions we could ask. It's hard to do it quickly. It's usually like a deep conversation. I've sat with friends before trying to help them debug basically algae problems and had like a 2-hour conversation, asking questions and stuff, going back and forth. Yeah, they're going to go slower, but just keep in mind, without all that excess carbon, they're not going to absorb as much nutrients and be able to process. It's not really correct with light, but you run into some issues to where they might not have as dense of foliage, so there's less removal from the water system and leaves things in place, and then with that extra light being present, the algae can capitalize between the light and the nutrients it needs. That makes sense. Dams G. Interesting. What is the max amount of Bozeman and Lake Katubu rainbow fish I can squeeze into a heavily planted 5-foot tank? I recently have access to wild-caught juveniles. Tell me your rough gallonage. Because you could have a 5-foot tank long that's only 18 inches, or it could be like 4 foot front to back, and then that changes the gallonage really fast. As a general rule, when I think of fish, the more important thing is not necessarily the size of the tank. Like once you get past 4 feet, right, it becomes the amount of maintenance you're willing to do and how much swim space you have. Because if you're super heavily planted with a lot of very tall plants, so there's not a lot of swim space, you don't want to have too many rainbows. Rainbows really love their swim space. And that can be front to back, and it can be side to side. It's usually just not up and down. So if your tank is like, 12 inches front to back, but like 3 foot tall, that doesn't help rainbows very much. But coral fans will love that stuff. Saltwater people love that kind of tank. So think first about how dense your planting is. Is there still good swim space? Like, are you mostly crypts and anubias and maybe some java fern, but there's plenty of upper water swim space? Okay, cool. But if you're lots of like really tall plants like swords and stems, and really just kind of like these thin windows of area that are like this, front to back for those fish to swim, then we don't want to put too many fish in that tank, even though it's a large tank, right? 5 feet's quite a bit. 5 feet's pretty much like optimal for a lot of rainbow fish. 5 to 6 foot is amazing. So it gives them lots of extra room. But if you have too much planting, it reduces that swim space. And we could be like, I've got a 5-foot tank. It's 10 jillion billion gallons. Well, I've probably only got enough swim space for like 50 gallons, right? Then we can't have like 400 rainbow fish in that thing. We can only have like 10. So those would be the things I would advise you on. Think about those things first. And then from there, look at it like this. For every 5 fish you want to put in, I would try to do 2 males to 3 females. This is going to give you the best behavior out of those fish. So courting, coloration, it's going to limit the amount of harassment on individual females as males are trying to court and spawn and do all the things that rainbow fish do. They're dumb and they're beautiful, they're wonderful, but sometimes they can tire those poor girls out, so give a few extra girls. That makes it a little easier on them. It's kind of similar to like when you overstock an African cichlid tank. It spreads out the aggression so you don't end up with like, the murder fest tank. right? Um, I would say at your rough gallonage, depending on how we look at your planting, you could probably keep easily 15 rainbows and account for how big they're going to get over time. Now, if you were doing purely smaller fish, you might be able to go more, right? But we might start a little small and then work up. So just think about those things, G, and you'll find the right answer. Don't worry about having like the max right away, because rainbow fish are pretty peaceful with each other. You can have 1.5 inch younger rainbow fish in with full adult rainbow fish, and they'll do okay as long as you're giving them enough food and they have places to swim and to hide if they need to. So if that, when your like dominant male is out there going like, I'm the boss now, only I get to see the girls, get out of my way, the rest of the fish have places to kind of just go. Nice heavily planted tank helps with that. They can chill and be okay. Hope that helps. If not, shoot me an email. Dennis Engel, have you ever had a tank with only algae as your plants? Well, algae aren't plants. But I see what you're talking about. I personally haven't kept anything like that. I've always had plants in almost all my tanks. But you know where that's best? Shrimp. Especially that softer, light green, wavy algae stuff. Oh, they love that stuff. They love that stuff. Make sure I'm not missing any other questions I want to grab here. We had a lot of conversation on the hair algae, which I appreciate. Thanks, team. Uh-oh. What did bears get? What did I miss? I see a statement about kid on Christmas. Somebody inform me. I missed something. Oh, aha. Cordus Fowler Eye spawned. Wait a minute. I don't recognize that right off the top. Let me go look this up. I need to look this Cory up. Ooh. Those are cool. Kind of like one of the longer snout Corys, too. That's a really neat Cory. I don't think I've ever seen this fish in person before. And I know some Corydora, like, crazy people, but I can't say I've ever seen that in person. That is super cool. Hopefully, you want to see, geez, you're going to make me do that kind of work? Hold on. Hold on. I'll go blatantly plagiarize images off the internet. We'll get... I like this one from Aquarium Glazer. They usually have really good photography. Just go to the website and let me see it. Let me see it. Yeah, look at that. That's a great photo right there. That'll do. Bounce all these things all over the place. Ooh, hold on. Hold on. Trying to do it. Oh. Gotta look in the right folder. Or apparently not. Where did I save this thing? Oh. I feel silly. It's not normally where I save random pictures from the interwebs. There it is. Okay. It's a little small, but here you go. These are the Fowler Eye. Really cool looking. I like the splotch that they have on the back body here. It's really unique. You've got kind of like the squiggly line pattern that's up in the face, and a lot of Corys have that, but that big splotch, you don't really see that. It's kind of like in rainbow fish, you have the Frederick eye, right? That have that big black splotch in their lower rear section. And it's very unique to that particular fish. It's very, very pretty. That's a super cool fish. I've never seen those in person. I hope you continue to have success raising your babies because I would love to see those go out to people. They're almost 4 inches. Wow, so they're big, Corey. They're kind of like the Scleromycetes barbatus, where they get real big. That's super cool. That's super cool. You should, Bears. I would totally encourage you to do like a write up, or if you're willing to do a video or something like that. Do something where you can explain like how you got them to breed and stuff like that. That'd be super cool. That's just a super cool fish. Okay, okay. Let me see. I'm gonna show you if I can find one last question real fast. Oh, by the way, for those that are waiting on towels, I should have them in the mail tomorrow. Sorry, I got kind of caught up with a bunch of family stuff. I meant to do them more earlier than that, but they'll be coming to you. Don't worry, they're coming. I promise. And I'll be emailing all of you who emailed me your appropriate addresses, your tracking numbers. I'm gonna ship them just priority mail, so you should get them Friday, Saturday, depending on where you live. Most of you who won them, you're in areas where delivery is relatively reliable. So yeah. Nabokov fan, I watched a video last week, someone who fed frozen food for the very first time. Very enjoyable to see their happiness. What is something you've never done that you really want to in the hobby? Like that clarifier at the end. That's a really good question. I would like to be able to successfully maintain a live Daphnia culture. I have not been able to do that reliably and successfully yet. And whenever I have my garage done, which is a slow and steady progress on that thing, I would like to be able to have live Daphnia to feed regularly to my fish because it's just such a good food. I mean, it can hatch brine regularly. That's not so bad. Keeping a continuously active brine culture is a little tougher, but I would love to do that. That would be really cool. That would make me very, very happy. There's a lot of other stuff that we could go with, breeding certain fish. Not screwing up shrimp would be nice. But I think realistically, of the things that I have been unable to do that I really want to do, keeping an active live Daphnia culture is probably it. Also, having a consistently available green water culture. A little easier to pull that one off, let's be fair. But it would be nice. Oh, man. Anyway. Gang, I want to thank you all very, very much for being here tonight. We had a little fun. We talked some history. Some of your minds got blown, kind of like mine did when I was doing some study on this stuff earlier, where it's like, Mattel is the reason why our glass boxes exist as they do. The toy company, really? Or Eheim was a toy company way back in the day and was like, aquariums, that'll never be cool. Those kind of things. But, guys, thank you so much. As always, I love just around this time of year, we get in the Thanksgiving holidays, the holidays in general. I love expressing my thanks to you guys for being here, for keeping all of us fish keepers sane or insane, who knows, whichever you prefer, right? And being supportive of all your various fish creators. Thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome. See you guys next week.